We are expecting Tim Farron, don't worry. He's on his way from the BIC with a group of people in a car, so due to arrive here in 15 minutes or so. So we've got some time to fill. We'll fill it with good things, but let me just say, as an initial announcement, on the screen you will see a mobile number. That's the number that for later in the evening you can text to when you want to ask Tim various questions from what he said and what he shared with us. So that's the number that I'll repeat again, but for your awareness, when you come to the Q&A towards the end of our program tonight, that's the number to use. So we're exploring this evening not just an invitation to come and hear a politician talk about Jesus, which is quite a rare thing in our culture, but we're exploring also the interface between faith and politics. How do Christian people with faith convictions engage in the whole political process? At the heart of our democracy, our parliamentary democracy, there's a large gathering of Christian MPs. And we're going to begin by seeing a little video made by the National Parliamentary Prayer Breakfast in 2022.
I think Christians should get involved in politics because of what politics needs to be, and that's a way to fix problems, to bring people together. I think the answers to that, some Christians may find those on the centre-left or the centre-right or anywhere on the spectrum. But I think you've got to contrast that to what we see a little bit in this country, but also around the world, which is people who I think maybe aren't interested in solving problems. They're maybe seeking to use, and in some cases, create division in order to get elected. And for me, that's not what politics is. It's not what it should be. And we need people who are genuinely interested in the common good, wanting to be in Parliament, wanting to fix some of these problems.
We all have a view on the kind of country we want to live in, and I think Christians are encouraged to live out our faith in the public arena. You know, being involved in politics is a form of public service, and I think politics really benefits from having, you know, Christians, people with faith, people with no faith, actually being active in politics.
Christians should be everywhere. They should be everywhere witnessing grace and all the fruits of the Spirit. Now, of course, that's a tricky thing to do in politics, but we should always try.
It's really important as we share the love of God that we're involved in politics, so that the Word of God is able to be involved in every policy that we make, but also that it's being seen throughout the country as well. And I think that as Christians, if we're not in the room having those discussions, then unfortunately it means that we won't get the representation that people desperately need from us.
I think it's really important in this secular world that we try and uphold biblical standards, Christian principles. They are being eroded all around us, and it's essential that we try and maintain a biblical stance on policy issues when law is being established.
Well, who's the greatest of all lawmaker? It has to be Moses. After all, didn't he come down with 10 commandments written in stone, which were really good laws? And that's what laws are based on, really good ideas. And if we want to influence our society, don't kill, don't steal, don't covet, do right to your neighbour. Surely we should try to imitate that and be those lawmakers for today. So yes, of course, Christians should be involved in politics and try to influence the society we're in.
We've got a God who wants to be involved in our world, and therefore we've got a great opportunity to serve with him in this place of Westminster to shape our nation and beyond. And that's why it's so important that Christians get involved in the political life of our country.
I worked in the city, and I said to my minister, I think I should go to theological college. He said, don't be an idiot. He said, if you go to theological college, who's the Christian in your office? And it's the same principle here. Who are the Christians here in Parliament? We should be salt and light, okay? And you work for the common good.
I think the Bible's really clear. God is interested in how we run our lives and how we run society, and therefore it's really important that Christians get involved. And so I've got several colleagues from all parties who are active, obviously, in politics, and we're trying to steward God's creation and the world that we live in, and we're doing that through the way that we govern ourselves. And we have different views about that sometimes, but that's what it's all about.
I think fundamentally politics is about serving, and being a Christian is about serving and doing good for the community, being able to put others before yourself. I think Christian values and beliefs fit very well into politics if it's done in the right way and with the best will. And I think it's important, the more people who come into politics to serve others will make such a difference right across the United Kingdom.
think we should certainly care about politics. You know, whether you want to get involved and stand for election or join a party, that's maybe another matter. I think I would encourage you to do. But 100% of Christians should care about politics because we care about the people of this world. These people are God's creation, everyone created equally in God's image, and therefore they are fearfully and wonderfully made. And politics is about how their lives are run and ordered in this life. We mustn't see politics as an ultimate thing. It's not the solution to everyone's problems, but it is a way of serving people, of making at least your corner of the world that bit better and doing it in God's name.
I think faith in Jesus is the best starting point there is for democratic politics, because it's the source of exactly the values that we need to make politics work. Responsibility, solidarity, patience, persistence, compassion, truthfulness. Those are the things that can deliver confidence in politics. And, you know, if the Christians aren't there, and if politics isn't delivering, if people don't have confidence in the values underpinning our confidence, well, whose fault is that? Christians need to be involved.
You may recognize a number of the faces there who took part in that video. Mainly it was recorded during the 2022 National Parliamentary Prayer Breakfast. As I mentioned, Tim Farron, of course, was on the screen. I had the real privilege this year, a few months ago, of taking Jessica Toll, the Labour MP here in Bournemouth, up to the Parliamentary Breakfast. John Lennox spoke to the subject, God in the Public Square. The Gettys led the music. And you're going to see just the beginning of the prayer breakfast as the speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, addresses the several hundred in the Westminster Hall.
Order, order. Can I first of all welcome you all to members of both Houses of Parliament, church leaders, representatives of the Christian organisations, and officers and staff of the Palace of Westminster. I'm delighted that we have 170 MPs attending today, along with church leaders from their constituencies from all over the United Kingdom. I also have great pleasure in welcoming John Lennox and look forward to hearing his reflections on the important question of God in the public square. And of course, this is a return visit for John, and I understand his relative is part of the singing today, so I think this is John Lennox's day. Although the architecture of this very hall seems to have already answered the question for us. For if you look up at this fine hammer beam roof above, you will see that we have angels watching over us. I think Parliament ought to sit in here more often. We are told that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I hope that this year's breakfast will begin a day full of inspiration and encouragement. Once again, I welcome you all to Westminster Hall.
That's how it began, and it was a great morning. I sat around a table with lords and ladies and peers of the realm, and I was just a reverend. That's all I was. There was a canon, a bishop, an earl. A remarkable experience, actually, for me personally, to be there and to witness the numbers of Christians who belong to that Christians in Parliament group that was referred to. And it was a thrill to be able to engage with some of our politicians. Wes Streeting was there in the gathering, and many others as well. And it made me realize that we can become, if we're not careful, quite cynical about the way in which our British culture is drifting, sadly, further and further away from its Christian heritage, and that's not to be denied. But the reality is still that in Parliament today, there are many, many Christians who love Christ, love his word, and are seeking to serve the cause of the Christian faith as salt and light in that environment. But it's a challenge. Of course it is. It's a challenge, whether tonight you are a Liberal Democrat, Green Party, Labour, Conservative. Reflecting your Christian convictions through the political process is a challenge to be navigated. Let's look at another video now that explores the issues at the heart of that challenge, how to be a Christian and how to love all those who are involved with you in the political process.
I have dear friends on both sides of the political divide in the United States. It's painful to hear kind, wonderful people describe two drastically different versions of the same event. Separate news sources are leading to people not just disagreeing, but speaking what seem to be different languages. Some of this language is helping to widen divisions in the UK too. And post-Brexit, meaningful dialogue and reconciliation is increasingly difficult. We badly need some common vocabulary and some shared stories. I saw this at first hand growing up in a divided Northern Ireland. Perhaps it would help to go right back to a time before any divisions. The theological idea of the Imago Dei, meaning image of God, gleaned from the first chapter of Genesis, reminds us that we are designed to reflect our Creator to the world. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness." In other words, we all have divine DNA in us, our ID. This is our shared core identity. This is the thing that people should see if they bite into any part of us, like a stick of rock. But another thing we all share is our imperfection. The image gets blurred and we lose some connection with that core identity. But our desire to get a sense of who we are and where we fit continues to operate. We need to find our identity somewhere. So finding other people who think and act a bit like us does wonders for our sense of self. But if we lose a grip on our core identity, as those made in the image of God, our ID, we inevitably cling just a little too tightly to those other identities. In the political realm, these tribes may be conservative, progressive, Brexiteer, Remainer, Democrat, Republican, or many others. Insidiously, these identities start to take precedence. I've seen it happen to myself and many friends. Of course, we would rarely admit that they are taking over, but sadly, our actions, and especially our reactions, for example, on social media, tell a different story. Could we hold these other identities in our hands lightly, rather than gripping them so tightly that the tension in our whole body increases, leading to the angry, visceral quality of our present debates? That's what happens when your idols are poked. Idols aren't bad things. They're good things that get in the way of the main thing. Bearing in mind the toxicity and speed of the social media scape, it's easy to see how people need their tribes for some safety in numbers. But if our response to every issue is just the knee-jerk reaction of our tribe, then we leave no space for breath, reflection, or prayer. There's rarely time to consult some ancient wisdom. The theologian Tom Wright points out that in life, we will always need progressive moments, i.e., things need to change. But at times, we'll also need conservative moments when things need to stay the same. History is littered with both being significant. I find the same is true of parenting. There are times when a progressive response is required. Okay, you can start eating solid food now. And times when a conservative response is required. No, we still don't pour milk on the laptop. Parenting is also a subject that often leads to painful family friction or awkward moments with friends. Whether you're co-sleeping or employing military-style discipline, just like politics, those disagreements often get visceral. So much of our identity is tied up in our insecurities around parenting, past or present, that we feel our very person is being attacked. But pragmatic parenting often ends up gleaning whatever works from whatever part of the ideological spectrum. Might the same be true of politics? If we get lost in one tribe, the peer pressure makes it increasingly hard to believe anything of worth could emerge from the other side. As an example, just because we seem to be here on the spectrum about, say, economics, it doesn't mean we'll always be in the same place on another issue, like abortion. A simple left-right spectrum can't describe the complexity of human beings. Failing to embrace our core identity, that we're all made in the image of God, all part of one human family, also leaves the door open to the next level of ugliness. We other those we disagree with. They become people who are easy to label, mock, and then dismiss. They become the problem, and we would rather see them removed from proceedings than be reconciled to them. Again, Northern Ireland provides an example of what can so easily happen when we slide down that path. We would do well to note the words of theologian Vinod Ramachandran, who said that when you stand face to face with another human being made in the image of God, remember you are standing in the presence of a vehicle of the divine.
There we are. Helpful, wasn't it, to think through our core identity and then our political identity and affiliation and convictions. I'm playing for time, so I want to invite Toby Slade onto the platform at this point. This is not a party political context, in spite of the fact that our main event is the Liberal Democrat Tim Farron. So I thought it'd be good to hear from a young local councillor. Let's put this on. Here we are, Toby. Please take a seat. Welcome to the chair. Tell us how you first got involved and interested in politics.
I've made some notes because it's more nervous here than it is in that town centre chamber, so I'm going to look down here if that's okay. I did politics in school, college. No interest prior to that, no real interest in college, but college it was a lesson to do, so I did it. And that was, 20 plus years ago. I left college, still had no real interest in it, went into business, no interest, kept an eye on things going on in the world and locally, but no interest. I got baptised last Easter Sunday.
Yes, you got baptised here, didn't you?
I did indeed.
Yeah.
And that's where it started. It was here's one, I'm going to look at my notes. It grew from a sense of responsibility after the baptism, and a conviction that I was meant to lead or to serve, yes, and to share that faith in public.
So how did you take those little next steps into the arena?
I rejoined the party locally, and then the party reached out to me.
Full disclosure, Tory party.
I reached out to the Conservative Party, yeah. They reached out to me, having done my membership, and said, would you get involved? And it went very, very quickly in the space of 6 weeks from joining to a by-election being called, to running, to winning, and I was in at the deep end very, very quickly.
And now you're in the Muscliffe?
Muscliffe and Stratton Park is my ward, yeah.
That's your ward?
There's 3 of us down there. There's 2 independents and myself. Big ward,
yeah,
big task.
Yes,
yeah.
Welcome, friends, welcome. I'm just interviewing a Tory here. I hope you don't mind, Tim. So, as a Christian, committed Christian, baptised here only a year ago, in the deep end of politics here, in terms of the local council and local politics scene, how are you finding, Toby, that journey? Is it tough to be a Christian in chamber, in the council?
Yes.
How? In what ways?
How? Faith reminds me that we're all made in that image of God. And in there, I feel as if I am, bar one other person, there is no other Christians.
Right. So it feels pretty lonely sometimes.
Yeah, it can do.
Yeah.
We can disagree on the journey, but ultimately it's that destination hopefully we can all agree on, but it's not an easy task.
Yes.
And it can be lonely. But I take a little card with me that was given to me on my baptism here, and I mentioned it last time, 1 Corinthians 15:58, and it's stand firm, let nothing move you, always give yourself fully to the works of the Lord. It comes with me every time.
That's a great verse to take with you into any arena of life, especially into politics. So as you sort of look at your direction of travel going forward, what are the next sort of steps for you?
I've got 2 years until the local elections here, and I will give myself fully to the ward, into the town, and trying to better it. And then it's running the general is the intention for me. Locally, if I can, a couple of local associations have reached out with a view to staying there, so
right.
I want to run in the general and take that faith and be a Christian in politics, be a Christian politician rather than a Christian in politics.
Yes. That's the, well, we will remember you over the next few years as that journey begins to take shape. Let's give him a round of applause, shall we? Thanks, Toby. Tim, come and join me. Toby Slade. Tim Farron.
To meet you. God bless.
Are you wired up for sound, Tim?
I'm wired up. Yes, I feel really.
I'm so glad you made it. I was playing for time there, you know.
Yeah,
so,
well, and very well too. I feel like Madonna wearing this.
Yeah,
Many similarities people have often remarked upon this.
So, welcome to Bournemouth.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Lansdowne.
Especially.
When did things kick off in the BIC?
Well, they kind of just have. I've literally come from the stage about 10 minutes ago. I was giving a rant about patriotism being better than nationalism, but we'll come on to that later on if you want to ask me a question about it. Okay. So I've just, I'm just decompressing now, so thank you for having me.
Yes.
You seem, I would say
we can
a more
unwind,
balanced audience, frankly. So
we can unwind together.
That's very kind.
Let me prep you when I prep them.
Yeah.
It's a game of two halves. We'll have a little chat. Then you can do your talk on engaging, Christian engaging politics. That number on the screen, Tim, is not for you to ring somebody. It's the number that people will ring in to ask you questions in the last lap for our Q&A. So people will be creating their questions as we talk and as we chat, as we hear you a little later. So it's amazing what you can find out about people, isn't it, nowadays, through the world of online information. You won an edition of Celebrity Mastermind in 2018 with your special subject being Blackburn Rovers.
This is true.
You starred in a teenage rock band called Fred and the Girls.
Fred the Girl.
Fred the Girl.
Yes.
Right, we won't go there.
Not really rock, but go
on. You married Rosie, but you only paid £19 for her engagement ring.
That was literally all the money I'd left in my account.
Yeah. You've spoken at the Keswick Convention.
Twice.
You do apparently, I'm not asking you to do it now, but apparently this guy does a very good impression or impersonation of Nigel Farage.
Not quite. Not quite. When Nick Clegg did the debate with Nigel Farage, I had to play Nigel Farage in the preparation. Okay. So I obviously didn't do a very good job.
Okay, well, whatever. It's down there now as a fact, You completed the 2021 London Marathon in a time of 4 hours, 44 minutes, and 44 seconds. Spooky. There's something very methodical and very regular about you, Tim. You have 4 children.
Yes.
And you're a vegetarian, but there's no connection between those two things.
No.
Now we get to the more serious bit. You made your maiden speech in Parliament on May the 25th in 2005. And your first speech as leader of the Lib Dem Party here in Bournemouth at the conference in 20... Now, was that, this is your life, was that the highlight of your life at that point, in terms of politically?
I guess in one sense, if you look at it in a kind of very worldly way, I suppose, I was never likely to get any further, and therefore there I was. So yeah, I'd been a member of the party since I was 16, and there I was at the age of, what would it have been, 45 then. I got to be the leader of the party I'd joined as a kid. So yeah, I guess it probably was, yeah.
So then, fast forward 2 years, and later, in 2017 in June, you stood down as party leader less than 2 weeks after the general election. It made media headlines. I, along with others, watched your sort of resignation speech to your colleagues in the Lib Dem party. You were quoted at the time as saying, "I was torn between living as a faithful Christian and serving as a political leader. You could either be a bad leader or a bad Christian." That was very dramatic. Was it that binary for you?
Well, it felt it at that time. The general election of 2017, which I led us through, I mean, in one sense, I became leader, so my maiden speech as party leader in 2015, just at the BIC over the way, came after the Liberal Democrats had got absolutely annihilated in the 2015 election. And so 2017 was a little bit of a comeback in the sense we went up from 8 to 12. We'd kind of survived. And we could easily have gone from 8 to nothing. And there was a moment when I thought that was going to happen. So in one sense, it was, in terms of the result of the election, you'd perhaps give us a C+ or a B-. It wasn't awful. It was, okay. But undoubtedly, the concentration for quite a lot of my time as leader, but particularly during the first part of that leadership campaign, was on my Christianity, in particular, the stuff that kind of jarred with the culture at the time, and probably today, issues to do with sex, sexuality, identity. Now, I always say that a wiser person than me could have handled that better. And proof that there are wiser people than me, some of you will have heard of my friend Kate Forbes, who didn't lead the SNP, And she is, I'm really gutted to learn that she's going to step down from the Scottish Parliament next time round. But she handled, I thought, her time under the spotlight better and wiser than I did. But in the end, I thought I got myself into a situation where either I would have to kind of water down what I believed, at least in public, in order to kind of get the cameras off me and to be a decent leader, or else I would have had to stand firm and failed in that. And so I just thought, look, I don't have to carry on doing this. And that general election campaign lasted 7 weeks. It was a long 7 weeks. You're away from home. Normally in elections, I'm immersed in my constituency. I might make a handful of visits elsewhere. But for 7 weeks, I was away from home, my family, my kids, my patch, my church. And the penny just sort of dropped maybe a week or two into the campaign. Do you know, there is a way out of this, and that is I can, serve my community well, I can be a faithful Christian, and I will step down as leader. And I made that decision in the back of the, talking about being a Blackburn Rovers fan, actually we had the re-liveried Crystal Palace coach, and they weren't as good then, Crystal Palace, so all yellowed up for the leaders tour, and in the back section of the coach is the bit for the manager behind the curtains, and I was there on my own, me and the Lord and praying, and it just occurred to me, I am going to step down, but not just yet. I will see through this election campaign. I will throw myself at this, and then at a respectful point after the election, I will step back. And that's what happened. And I always say, I'm delighted and honoured I was leader, and I'm delighted I'm not leader. But I think it taught me many things, and I guess it's given me a platform to be a public Christian. Yeah.
We'll come back to that in a moment. But let's go back to the beginning of that Christian story. How did you actually become a follower of Jesus? In what circumstances?
I mean, I've got two testimonies, and they're both true. And one I'm 18 and one I'm 9. But the one I've always told, in a nutshell, somewhere from Lancashire, my mum taught at what is now the University of Central Lancashire, but was then Preston Polytechnic. When I was 18, she got seconded to a college in Singapore. We'd never been abroad. Well, I'd been abroad once for a week at that stage in my life, so it was massively glamorous for us. It happened to be the summer between my A-levels and university. We went out there. The house we were given was slightly too small for us, and so they ended up clearing what was the storeroom for the previous tenants, who'd also taught at the college, who were Christians, clearing their stuff out of that room and sticking a bed in there for me. I was the first to go home to get my A-level results so I could have the crummy room. Fair enough. And, of course, the stuff they didn't really properly clear away were their books. And it was hot. It rained quite a lot. I didn't have that much money with me. I ended up being in that room more than I wanted to, and I read a load of books. And the first book I read was something called I Once Loved a Girl, which was all about sexual ethics. I read about a page of it and thought, get knotted. I'm not reading any more of that. So I ended up reading all the Winnie the Pooh books, which were there. I brought one book with me. I remember it very well. It was called Darkness at Noon by Arthur Koestler, and it is miserable. It's all about life in Stalinist Russia. Anyway, and eventually I was so bored, I ended up reading these frightening God books. And I ended up reading books that we'd call them about apologetics, prophecy, evidence. And so, look, it struck me in the early hours of one morning in 1988 when I was 18, early August, oh, flippin' heck, it's true. And I won't have said a very clever or articulate prayer, but it occurred to me that Christianity was dynamic, that the story wasn't over, that Jesus was making claims far loftier and more interesting than the ones I thought he made. And I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And I thought, well, I better go through you then. And so I put my trust in Jesus. And I definitely, it's not been all, sweetness and light and unbroken fellowship and obedience ever since. The brackets to that, the PS, so I say 9 maybe as well. When I was 18, I made that decision. And I made it sort of almost intellectually. And in the months and years that followed, I went down all the kind of apologetics routes you might imagine, learning about the number of manuscripts there are, what happened to the disciples, the evidence from non-Christian texts, stuff that kind of strengthened my faith, if you like. And so I would talk, before I became leader, but particularly in the years after, talk about how I came to faith. And there's a danger in the kind of, and I belong to an FIEC church as well, and the danger in evangelical circles that we can venerate our testimonies a little bit, and they can become a little bit of an instrument of pride. And there is a danger that what I was basically saying in telling the story in more detail than I've just told you, is that Christianity is a very clever thing, and that clever Tim cleverly discovered it. I was sharing my testimony on a church stage, not unlike this, maybe 10, 12 years ago, whatever, and I remembered something, and it's definitely true, it's not a false memory. And so going back, my mum again, my mum had a wonderful friend, Yvonne. These were, ladies born in the very late 1940s, children of the 60s and 70s, and, Yvonne was a bit hippie-ish, even more than my mum, and was into all sorts of wacky, wild and weird and interesting kind of things. One week it'd be Nostradamus, one week she'd have a friend who was a Jehovah's Witness, one week she'd have come across tarot cards. One week a Christian guy came round, and I was in bed upstairs, and our house was a very drafty old 2 up, 2 down terrace house. If the cat coughed in the basement, you could hear it in my bedroom, shall we say politely. So I could hear everything. And I heard this guy pleading with my mum and Yvonne to ask Jesus into their hearts. And I remember thinking, that sounds a really important thing. I've obviously heard of Jesus, I'm going to do that. So I did. And it occurs to me that God is not sniffy about the simple, unquestioning faith of a 9-year-old. Quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. In fact, the kind of clever, calculating faith of the 18-year-old, he's not necessarily looking for that. I mean, yes, absolutely, Christianity can stand its ground in the most rarefied of intellectual settings, but it's also accessible to a little kid who doesn't know what he's doing, to someone with dementia, someone with a learning difficulty. The bar to the kingdom is so low because Jesus has paid the price for us. All he's asking for is a simple act of trust. And so I look back and think 18 was a major moment for me. Reading those books and making that decision as an adult, just as I was just about then, that I'm not saying that's not massively important. It was hugely important. But I wonder whether actually God was not paying attention that night when I was 9.
Thank you for unpacking that. At 18, this commitment to Christ. 2 years before that, you'd signed up to the Liberal Democrat Party. In coming to Christ, how did that begin to shape your political convictions, the landscape that, the centre-left landscape that you were then becoming part of?
I'm so elderly, it was the Liberal Party. So we became the Liberal Democrats actually in 1988. I think my second ever conference in 1989 was here, also at the BIC. It's changed a bit, but not a lot, a couple of licks of paint. So I wish I could say that I really intellectually grappled with it well then. I don't really think I did. I think there were different aspects of my life, but I became a Christian, I say consciously. I made the decision to live as a Christian as an 18-year-old. I then, 2 months, I went 2 months having made that decision to become a Christian before I met another one. And I go to university in Newcastle, and my next door neighbour in my hall of residence, who was a second-year medic, very tall guy, called Pete Carrington, who I'm still in touch with. He knocked on my door. He could have had no idea I was a Christian at all. And he knocked on my door and he invited me to the Navigators. Many of you will know, a Christian student group. And I got fellowshipped that way. Now, I remember going to a Navigators coffee morning, maybe a couple of months later, and there's a lad called Adrian, who was one of twins, he said to me, because I'd already, I'd thrown myself into, I joined the Liberals at 16, I joined the Liberal or Lib Dem Society at university at Freshers Week and threw myself back into that and all the rest of it. And this guy, Adrian, said to me, why are you, how can you as a Christian be involved in politics? It's such a mucky business, which is where that all comes from.
Yes, that's a shameless plug for the book here.
Well, it is a shameless plug, but the reality is I had a rubbish, I don't even know what my answer was to Adrian at the time. But in the years that have followed, particularly since my time as a Member of Parliament, I've given it a lot of thought. And so there are many people who are Christians. I mean, Toby, probably one of them actually, but because I didn't hear the first bit of his interview, but really encouraged that he's here and he's a member of this church. It's fantastic. But another Christian from another political party, who I often cite, Stephen Timms, many of you will know, is a minister in this Labour government who's been an MP since, 1994, a Christian. He very much followed the trajectory I sort of would love to be able to say was mine, in that he was a Christian and he felt called into politics. Mine was much more haphazard than that. I got involved in politics, become a Christian. I thought, oh goodness, well, how do I fit the two together? So I struggled. After 4 years, 5 years, having left university, I'm afraid I backslid in my 20s from sort of 23 to 32. I came back, rededicating my life. Unbackslid is the phrase I use, when I was 32. And at that point, I was having my second go at trying to win Westmoreland, having lost it the first time. And then I really did give thought, what is the role of a Christian in politics? And I think there's lots. But I think I've come to the view that I came to the view, it's a bit simplistic this, it's not quite so black and white, that it's not my job to legislate to make people who are not Christians live as though they were. There's a phrase that Edmund Burke used, that all the laws against the godless have not saved one single soul. But it absolutely isn't to hide your light under a bushel. In your community, you're a kind of D-list celebrity, and nationwide you might be a Z-list celebrity, but you have a profile. Use it to confess with your lips that Jesus Christ is Lord. So that is what I've done. In fact, the church I go to now, Parr Street Evangelical Church in Kendal, an FIEC church, I've been going to since 2007. I was elected in 2005. Like I say, I unbackslid in 2002. Terrible phrase, but it's one that I use. One of the reasons I'll go to Parr Street was because shortly after I got elected, they invited me to a Wednesday night meeting during half term or something. And I assumed that I was just talking to the membership of the church. And so I was very open about my testimony. They hadn't told me that in true, FIEC fashion, they'd all brought their non-Christian mates. And I'm sure I would have been a lot more careful and guarded in what I'd said if I'd known, and I thank God that I didn't know. But having done that, by the way, there was one lady there who in her baptismal testimony cited that evening. And I think, right, this is a use of me. And so in my constituency from then on, I do a number of events like this in churches. I'd be invited to a church. I talk about being a Christian in politics, and then I try and share the gospel. But having stepped down as leader, I try and do that more now.
Yes, I was going to thank you for sharing that commitment to the local church and your faith, because clearly you are very public about your Christian convictions. Do you think in some senses, looking back to that moment when you stood down from the leadership role, it freed you in some ways?
I've got a very good friend of mine who's a pastor in London who says the best thing I ever did was resign. And the point being was it was the ability to kind of, because I don't think I've lost anything. I'm glad. I don't look at Ed Davey and think, "Oh, I wish I was doing that." I'm pleased to be a dutiful foot soldier. It's a privilege, and also to be a former leader. We're all wiser after the fact, aren't we? So it's always helped to good to be able to offer advice and so on. So I don't see it as a great loss, but nevertheless there is a sense. You asked me earlier on whether being making that speech as leader at my first conference as leader was a big deal. Yes, of course it was. We talked about Blackburn Rovers. If I was to run out at Ewood Park wearing the blue and white, and that yes, I'd have lived for that. And Breckies today, the game got called off after 80 minutes. We were winning. Anyway, so it was a game of two halves. We didn't get the second half. At least not the end of it. But I think that. But nevertheless, there's that sense in which that I got to the stage where I chose to give up what on paper was a thing that I'd strived all my life to achieve in order to try and falteringly be faithful to Jesus. And I kind of think, yeah, that's a good trade. That's a good trade. So there's lots of things I regret, but God's got an amazing habit of making use of useless people.
And I mean, your involvement is significant in terms of Christians in Parliament. You chair the all-party parliamentary group. You're a mucky business podcaster. Yeah. You popping up everywhere, saying your bit for the gospel and for the kingdom. Do you think, though, Tim, that in some respects, Christians like you have a slightly harder time than other faith persuaded people? I mean, do evangelicals, are we getting a persecution complex here? Do you feel that we seem to be subject to that more than others?
So I think it's an interesting point, and there's a few things to say to that. The first thing I'd say is we are told to expect trouble. We are told to expect persecution as Christians, and indeed to delight in it, and to celebrate it almost, to rejoice in it. That's the word. And we're never told to whine about being cancelled, but to turn the other cheek. And turning the other cheek means staying in the room. Doesn't mean running away. It means staying in the room and offering the other. You've hit me on that side. Here's my other side for you to go at. In other words, it's about staying in the room so you can establish a relationship with people. So we're not told to whine about being cancelled and get sulky about it. We can get cross about other people's rights being taken away, but not ours. That's not the path that Jesus trod. And then a second thing to say is whatever, if we can call it persecution, that we receive in this country and in the West more generally, it's not worthy of the name compared to our brothers and sisters in other parts of the world, in North Korea, where the only people who become Christians are the guards in the concentration camps guarding the Christians. So it's And then the third thing I'd say is just an explanation. So there is a little bit, I think, of non-Christian religions getting a bit more of a free pass. And it's partly a very English, British thing that we don't want to pick on an underdog. And the thing we as evangelicals forget is that society as a whole doesn't delineate between evangelicals, nominal Christians, Roman Catholics, Orthodox. It doesn't. It just sees Christians. And it sees this thing called the Church of England, that the king is the head of. So we don't look very oppressed to most people. We look like the established church. We're not, but that is how it looks. So it looks as though, and to a small degree it is true to say, that Christianity is privileged. And so whilst we believe, and I think it's right to say, that true Bible-believing Christianity is a minority in this country, that's not how it seems to the commentator class and to most people who are not Christians themselves. That's just an explanation, not an excuse.
It's a minority here, but it's not a minority view across the pond in the States. So let's just, as we kind of wind up this little chat together, let's reflect a little bit on some of that stuff. I mean, the polarization of our culture concerns all of us. You seem to do a brilliant job in cross-party work and involving folks who shake hands with Tories and all that kind of thing. So you obviously have found a way of
I do.
of working in that well. And not only has it become, or is becoming polarized, it's become weaponized.
Yeah.
And that tragic death of Charlie Kirk a couple of weeks ago. How do you read the situation there in terms of its similarities to what's happening here? The big protest march, United Kingdom, Tommy Robinson. Do you share that fear that we are in danger now of weaponizing the culture wars?
Yeah, I really do fear it. I don't think the UK needs to go that way. But they always say when America sneezes, the rest of the world gets a cold, and the UK especially. I think a couple of things that are worth saying. So, if you asked a a self-identified evangelical in the United Kingdom, do you go to church? In a very polite way, they go, yeah. What a silly thing to ask, almost. But nearly half of white evangelicals in the States don't go to church. In fact, 11% of Hindus in America identify as evangelicals. Because it turns out evangelical, amongst white people in the States at least, well, evangelical as a word, is a cultural, political descriptor, not a theological one. So it's important not to get confused by that. And it's also important, and I'm kind of biased, so you obviously take what I say with a pinch of salt, but it really troubles me that one side of the aisle has appropriated Christianity, and in the States, and I might say more of it when I have my moment to say a few words in a bit, but I think the danger there is that half of America has got its fingers in their ears when it comes to the gospel because they think that's the message of those people. And the danger of... So I think the culture war is not our fight as Christians. We're not meant to be in a culture war trench. You know, if you've picked a side, there's a good chance you're not on Jesus' side, so don't, is my humble advice. And because if you think about it, I mean, Tim Keller would talk about there being package deals, you know. So for instance, if you're a Christian, you should care about the unborn child and you should care about the refugee. You should care about what we call a traditional sexual ethic, and you should care about racial injustice. And the problem is the culture war says you've got to choose. No, you don't. As Christians, we are to be faithful to Christ and we're to follow the Bible. And the culture war package deals offer us impoverished deals that are not Christianity. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't join a political party. It doesn't mean you can't take a position. But it's not my word, it's a phrase that is used by a guy called Andy Flanagan, who runs Christians in Politics. He's a Labour man by background, but his phrase is, it's kingdom before tribe. Kingdom before tribe. And we must remember that Jesus is far bigger than your politics. Don't you dare belittle him.
That's very good indeed. Last question, and then we'll have a leg stretch and you can get a drink and we'll bring the lectern on or something. Looking the other way in terms of the map of the world, to the Middle East and Gaza and Israel and Palestine, the disaster and the awful realities that continue there. Given your evangelical convictions and your Bible-believing worldview, how do you think about what's going on there? How do you pray into what's going on there? How do you advise people who are coming to you with their lobby position one way or the other? It must be really difficult.
I mean, in one sense, we should treat it like any other conflict, and people who are aggressors, we should criticise. Those who are victims, we should stand with. It's not as simple as all that. On the theological side of it all, I'm no expert, but John Stott is normally right. And John Stott's writings on Israel, I just recommend anybody to take time to look at them. I think Israel is important as a country. I think the Jewish people absolutely form part of God's plan still to this day. I'm not convinced the current state of Israel has any special status as opposed to any other state. And even if it does, the Old Testament tells us that God does not hold back his anger at the injustice of Israel when it behaves in ways which are wrong. Now, having said that, you know, truth is the first casualty of war, and we know that so little of what gets out of Gaza gets out without Hamas's knowledge and say so. So it's a mess, it's horribly complicated. So we have to deal with this. And so when I'm somebody, so for example, I will go to the Lib Dem Friends of Israel event tomorrow night. I support the state of Israel, its right to defend itself, and I will remind everybody that it's the most democratic and free society anywhere in that part of the world. And I equally condemn Benjamin Netanyahu and his administration. You know, I can love Russia and Russians without having to back up Putin. And I think similarly about Israel. So that people will take different views on this, and obviously American evangelical Christianity tends to take the view that Israel still has kind of special biblical status. My sense is that it probably doesn't. But in any event, even if it does not give that state and its regime carte blanche to behave in an appalling manner. Having said all of that, it has been my utter heartbreaking privilege to spend time with now five of the families of hostages, including some who have been reunited, some who've only been reunited with a body, and some who still wait. My view is that we must not forget the 7th of October. We must not allow Hamas to have a kind of PR victory throughout all this. And also, just from an entirely pragmatic point of view, the thing that would undermine Netanyahu's, because there's a Middle England, you know, with your swing voters and all the rest of it. There's a Middle Israel too. There's a lot of people who don't like Netanyahu, but kind of think that whilst the hostages are still there, there's kind of a case for carrying on. The minute the hostages are gone, Middle Israel have no reason to carry on supporting Netanyahu. And Netanyahu knows that. And my humble view, it might be wrong, is that that's one of the reasons why this is continuing. It's why he doesn't engage with, you know, sensible possibilities to get the hostages out, because there will be an election at some point in the next year or so in Israel. As things stand, he would lose it. And the longer the conflict goes on, the more he can put off the election, is my take. So yeah, the leaders of Israel were never protected from God's wrath in the Bible, and they shouldn't be protected from accusations of poor behaviour today. But the hostages must be released.
Thank you, Tim. One last question. What do you pray about?
The most?
Yes.
I mean, honestly, my kids, that they'd know the Lord. That is, I mean, if you were to measure the volume of my prayers, there we are. And I pray regularly for our work as a team, my Faith in Public team, that God would guide what we do. We're a really small team. We have Morale with us tonight, who is part of the team. We have 4 directors who do it for nothing, and 4 part-time staff who help me to do things like this, to speak. So we pray for God's wisdom, that we would bring glory to him, and that I'd use the platform he's given me to serve him. So yeah, that would be, if you wanted to pray for me,
Excellent.
Those 2 things.
Thank you for your candour, your transparency, and your directness too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Right. Time for a stretch. Okay, 2-minute stretch. Visit the facilities if you want to. Back in 2 minutes, and then we'll have part 2, followed by the Q&A. All right?
Well, thank you. I want to use it.
And the storm had not been rolled. restores my soul. Surely your goodness and mercy are chasing after me all of the days of my life. Even when I'm lost in the deepest valley, I fear no evil. Even when the silence falls around me, I know you hear me. Even when it feels like we're separated, you're holding on to me. You lift my head, you wipe my tears, you restore my soul. You draw me into your embrace, you restore my soul. Surely
Okay, folks, can we come back into the room now and as we look forward to part 2? Don't forget, that's the number that you can text with your questions at the end of what Tim is going to share with us now. I've been reminded by somebody in the gathering tonight that CARE have produced a very good book entitled How to Talk to Your MP. And in the middle of that book, apparently, Tim, you've written a chapter, a helpful chapter on that, How to Talk to Your MP, CARE publications. All right, so I think we're all back and raring to go. And again, Tim, thank you so much for finding time to be with us. Over to you.
Great, thank you. It's a genuine blessing to be asked to do this. As I just said in the interview earlier on, it's been a thing that I kind of happened on really over the years, that you are if you have any kind of a profile as a Christian, the cap fits, wear it. And so it's an opportunity to use whatever little profile you've got to share the gospel with others. And I often say, I mean, you were very kind in your questioning earlier on, but there were moments certainly when I was leader where, if I look like a rabbit in the headlights, and I suppose now that I'm roadkill, it doesn't matter, so I'm animated roadkill, and I feel rejoicing in that being my status. So I've kind of got the lectern really, because I did scribble some notes. Morale was with me whilst I wrote them down earlier on, and as you can see, these are encrypted. There's literally nobody can read this. I absolutely should have been a doctor, and so can I read this? Who knows really? But you're more likely that I won't go on forever if I do at least abide by those notes to a degree. I'm reminded of a late great colleague of mine who shall remain nameless, who when he was a member of Parliament went to speak at a women's institute in his constituency, and by his own admission he went on a bit long. And as he was being escorted back to his car by the secretary of that WI, she said to him, "Thank you much for coming along this evening, Mr. Ashdown. Oops. Do come again when you have less time." So let's see if I fall into that trap or not. So look, I kind of share with you a little bit of my story of coming to faith. And I kind of want to say a little bit of word of encouragement, which we did touch upon earlier on. And that is, for all that I kind of despair a little bit about how politics is in America, the relationship between Christianity and politics in Parliament in this country is not so bad. So it's my honour to co-chair Christians in Parliament with a Conservative MP, a Labour MP, and an independent member of the House of Lords. In my Bible study group, on sort of the worst things, I guess, about being a Christian in Parliament is I'm never home for church house group on a Wednesday evening, and so it means that I miss out on that front. I kind of cope pretty well because we have a Bible study that meets every Wednesday morning, and around the table there's normally 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of us from 3, 4, sometimes 5 parties. In that group, I've got everything from Corbynite Labour to very Brexity Tory. In fact, one of them, I better not give away anything away really, but may or may not now be a member of the Reform Party. And just to give you a picture, so I emphasise I do it for free. Every week I do a radio show for Premier Christian Radio, which goes out as a podcast called A Mucky Business. We're on episode about 170 or something now, and we're doing a series of interviews with Christian politicians or commentators at each of the party conferences. And last week I spoke to my very good friend, actually, Tim Montgomery. Some of you will have heard of him. He was a Conservative commentator, been a member of the Conservative Party since he was 14, about the same age as me, now 55. But he joined Reform about a year ago, so I interviewed him last week. This week at our conference, I'll be interviewing Christian Lib Dem MP Callum Miller, who's the MP for Bicester and Woodstock. At the Labour conference, I'll interview a chap called Tom Collins, new Labour MP for Gloucester, and then John Glenn, who is the Conservative MP for Salisbury. I'll interview at the Conservative conference. And so I make a point of making sure that we do what we do in a cross-party way, and maybe even more encouraging than that, it was in June, I think it was, we had the annual, nearly always annual, Parliamentary prayer breakfast in Westminster Hall. About 750 people gathered to pray and to praise and to hear God's word preached very faithfully, this time by the eminent mathematician and apologist and defender of the Christian faith, Professor John Lennox. And the great thing about the Parliamentary prayer breakfast is that, yes, the likes of me go along, but the kind of way it works is that church leaders around the country invite their normally non-Christian member of Parliament to come with them to that event. So you get 100 people in that room who are not Christians, who hear the gospel over breakfast, and it's a wonderful thing. And talking to the pastoral team that work alongside Christians in Parliament, we know lots of really good and encouraging conversations have followed from that event in June. So I just kind of want you to be encouraged, really, that the state of Christianity in British politics is not bad at all. I would, remind, we talked about the state of the established church, of nominal Christianity within British politics in the interview. But it's worth noting that every single day in Parliament begins with prayers, and they're good prayers. Now, I have to say that the way it works is if you turn up at 8 a.m. and you put a prayer card in the back of your seat, and you then turn up for prayers later on that morning, that seat is yours for the day. So it's kind of the parliamentary equivalent of the Germans putting the beach towels on the sun lounges. But all the same, they're good prayers, and it brings people together. We talked earlier a little bit about the suspicion that Christians may be held in, and that is something that you might feel uncomfortable about. Because what is it to be a Christian? Well, I think there is a view, whilst we may have an established church in this country, I think the established view of most commentators, most politicians, the way in which our state operates, is the assumption that there's no God. And if you want to believe in a God, then yes, we'll tolerate that. We'll consider it to be eccentric in the conventional sense, in the literal sense, to be off-centre. You may have those weird and wacky views if you like. We prefer them to be kind of cultural and to be all focused on festivals and nice things that we think aren't too offensive. But if you really live in accordance with the values of your faith, then we consider you to be maybe a bit suspect or even worse. And I think, for instance, particularly during the debate that is still ongoing about assisted dying, assisted suicide, certainly a number of us have been called out by those who support the proposals as trying to force our views on others, as if somehow being believers we've got some kind of chief whip in the sky that means that we are somehow very, very suspect. And I just want to kind of encourage you, if you're somebody who is worried that you shouldn't bring your faith into the public square, I want to just reassure you that you can and you should. The reality is that Christianity is a worldview like any other. The idea that, a Marxist, a social democrat, a agnostic, an existential nihilist, a free market philosopher can walk into the debating chamber, so to speak, and bring their worldview with them, but we weird God botherers have got to leave ours at the door. That's nonsense. It doesn't make any intellectual sense whatsoever. Christianity is a lens through which we look at the world. It's a worldview. And from just ignoring the fact that we believe it to be true for a moment, it's no more or less legitimate than any other. So don't think it's, religious people have to keep their religion out of politics. That's a nonsense thing to say. It is also that assumption, going back to what I said a moment ago, that the absence of faith, that secularism, secular humanism, that's neutral. That's rubbish. There is no neutrality. No worldview is neutral. Everyone is loaded. And I would say from a liberal point of view, a truly liberal society is not one where we all mushily have to agree with one another. It's one where we respect one another for thinking quite different things whilst retaining the right to try and persuade others that they're wrong and that we, by God's grace, are not wrong. So don't worry about feeling that somehow you, or be embarrassed about bringing Jesus with you into the public square should you get called into politics or something like it. I spend a lot of my time trying to think myself and preach to myself as I read the Psalms. I'm going through the Psalms now. I'm down to up to 142, so I'm nearly there each day. The Psalms are very often the psalmists giving themselves a talking to. And we all need to do that sometimes, give ourselves a talking to. And one of the talking tos to myself that I feel I need to do sometimes is to not despair or panic about the state of the world. And so thinking as Christians, how some of you, like Toby or I, might end up getting involved in active politics. And there may be one or two more of you in here who might do too. But I think the rest of you ought to think carefully and recognise the importance of politics, pray about it in an informed way, and recognise that it's significant and worthy of our concern, not beneath nor above us. And I say this for a couple of reasons. So what should our posture be towards politics and the world around us? And you might well look at what's going on in the States and despair and be horrified. You might look at what's going on in Gaza and Israel and despair and be horrified. You might be terrified of what Putin's up to already in Ukraine or what it looks like he might be up to next in Poland and in the Baltic states. What could be next? The might of China. What might be next? And I want to say this not in a flippant way, but just to say, don't panic. I think the first thing Christians should do when looking at the state of the world is to not panic. I know that's the front cover of another book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Don't panic, it says on the front cover. But I don't think we should panic. I was really blessed at our church maybe 5 or 6 years ago by a series of sermons over a number of weeks on the book of Revelation. Lots I got out of that, lots. But one thing that really struck me that never really occurred to me before was to do with the regular references throughout that wonderful book to Babylon. And our pastor talked us through this, and one of the things he observed was that, of course, the first readers of Revelation, or first hearers of Revelation, were people for whom Babylon was in rubble and had been for several hundred years at that point. But maybe the use of Babylonian imagery in Revelation was to kind of contrast with the current reality to those people of terrifying Rome. Rome was real. Rome was not in rubble. Rome was persecuting. Rome was impoverishing. Rome was killing Christians. And maybe, the references to Babylon were a little reminder to those Christians, an encouragement to those Christians, that Rome too would go the same way. Rome too would end up in rubble. And so it is the case today. Just outside my patch, we've got Hadrian's Wall. We go and visit it. It is not now the outer reaches of a mighty empire. And doesn't it just encourage us that every single empire, government, regime, leader, whatever it might be, every election result, every referendum result, every political era you might sit through, whether it be something you rejoice in or despair at, all of them will end in rubble. Every single kingdom and empire will end in rubble except one. And I feel as a father, as a person, you know, who concerned with my own future. I fear what's going on in the world. I don't dismiss this. I'm not being flippant, but I'm reminded that God is on the throne, and all of these powerful men and women around the world that seem terrifying, they'll stand before him one day and their kingdoms will be in rubble. So don't panic. Don't panic as you look at the state of the world, but do pray, and also do care. And I think that one of the dangers is that I think the two temptations for Christians when it comes to politics is to either blend in or to hide away. Now, I think my track record as someone who needs to get elected, who just like everybody wants to be popular. I mean, by the way, I think the vice that more suckers in politicians than any other is vanity. It's not the lurid stuff that you read about in the tabloids. Now, that does happen, but it's vanity. Somebody very cruel once said, in fact, I think it was Gore Vidal, politics is showbiz for ugly people. So there's this sense that we all want to have our face on the telly. We've got no discernible talent, so this is what we end up doing. But there is a sense of pride and vanity that is inherent, I think, in politics. So maybe there is that temptation for Christians to just want to blend in, to be popular, to want to be loved, to want to get re-elected, and you just lose your saltiness, you lose your distinctiveness, and I think that was a tendency that I have had. And I won't say that that struggle is over by any means. But blending in is what some of us are tempted by. Hiding away is what more of us perhaps are tempted by, particularly in churches like this. And hiding away for a few reasons. One is you think politics is a mucky business. Keep it right at arm's length. It's filthy, bogged down in compromise and sin, have nothing to do with it. But there's also the sense that, well, if what I've just said is true, that God is sovereign, that Judgment Day is a certain date in history. We don't know it, but it's going to happen. And that God's people will be vindicated, will be redeemed, are redeemed, will be saved, and have eternity with him. All this is just pointless, temporary nonsense, and we aren't to worry about it. I think that's wrong. That is not what the Bible teaches us. Yes, it does teach us that God is sovereign, that there will be a day of judgment, and that by trusting in him we can have a redeemed life starting now and live for eternity in paradise with him. But it doesn't say that we shouldn't care about our embodied realities today, and it doesn't give us a cop-out about not caring for the people who we live alongside or across the world right now. And the scriptural... I've got various scriptural evidence points, if you like, for saying that we should neither blend in, but neither should we hide away. But the one that always moves me, really strikes me, is the account of the raising of Lazarus. I was in my flat in London cooking tea one night several years ago, and I just put Tim Keller's name in YouTube and thought, spin the wheel, I'll just listen to whatever it is. And on it came. And my goodness me, the sermon that came on whilst I was cooking my pasta was the sermon that Tim gave to his Manhattan church on the Sunday after 9/11. So, you could cut the air in my kitchen with a knife, and not just because I burnt stuff. It was. Can you just imagine? This was the nature of that church. There were so many empty pews in that church, and things felt and hung heavy. And so Tim Keller's text for that day was the raising of Lazarus, and he talked about Jesus, and as he arrives in Bethany, and Mary and Martha are in pieces, and he approaches the tomb. Now, Tim Keller knew his New Testament Greek. I don't. But Tim Keller says, and I'm sure other New Testament Greek scholars would agree with me, including my neighbour on my street, who is one. I'm quite fortunate to have him there, my friend Professor Thorley. That the translation we have in English of Jesus wept, Jesus was moved, Jesus once more was deeply moved, that these are really weak, very English translations, and that actually what the original text says is something more akin to Jesus approached the tomb bawling like a wild animal, raging at the tomb. I find that impossibly moving, because what do we fear the most? It's death. The loss of relationship when others die. That's what we fear the most. That's what we hate the most. isn't it utterly inspiring and utterly moving to know that our Saviour hates it as much as we, and more. And so that he approached the tomb bawling like a wild animal. Now, he's God. He knows he's going to raise Lazarus in a matter of moments. He's not faking it because he's pure and he's perfect and he's Jesus. Neither does he turn to Mary and Martha and go, "Oh, pull yourselves together, girls, look what I'm about to do." He doesn't. He doesn't. He enters in to the pain and the suffering in the moment in all total sincerity. So should we. So should we. Yes, yes, this fallen world will be brought to a moment of end, and there will be a new creation where there will be no more suffering or tears or death, and the old ways will have passed away. Yes, but whilst you're here, you're meant to enter into the suffering in this world, get your hands dirty, get your hearts broken, and serve where you have been put. So don't pack. I just want to say a couple of other things as well about what difference does it make then to you as a politician if you are a Christian. I would say that it's important for us to remember that our identity is in Christ, and that we can so very often, I talked about kingdom before tribe. You can be a politician, you can be somebody with strong opinions, you may be very cross about something, passionate about something. Just remember that your identity is in Christ. It's not in the colour of rosette you're wearing. It's not any other kind of badge that you might be wearing. It's also important to remember that your identity in Christ really means something. And it means something to Jesus. Yes, we are all brothers and sisters here, and so are hundreds of millions of us across the world. But Morale reminded me of this earlier on in Acts, when Jesus appears to Saul of Tarsus. He goes, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Why do you persecute me? Saul was persecuting these Jewish Christians, these people that follows the way. Jesus, he never met Jesus. Well, now he had. But Jesus thinks and fully believes, and it is true therefore, that if you are persecuted, what happens to you happens to him. That's a wonderful thing. That's a wonderful reality. Really good friend of mine who lost his seat in Parliament. This happened a few years ago. And he said to me, obviously losing my seat was a massive financial blow. But actually the thing I felt the most is that I'd lost my identity. Being a member of Parliament was who I was. And I think that is a thing that we should all guard against, because it's not just being a member of Parliament where we can find ourselves in a situation where we think this is who we are. The things that we have are wonderful gifts. God's gifts to us every day. We're meant to enjoy them. I read a book about Ecclesiastes the other, finished it last month. It was an amazing book, and it was the first time any Christian who I really, really respected, a Christian author who was a really faithful, orthodox believer, talked about how bucket lists are all right for Christians. And I thought, really? Because I always thought it was a bit materialistic. But looking at Ecclesiastes and thinking about what God has to say there, God gives us good things. And we're not meant to be sniffy about them. We're meant to rejoice in them and enjoy them, but we're meant to hold them lightly. They are gifts from God. They're not God. They're not God. So I rejoice in the fact that I've had the privilege of serving my patch for 20 years now. But it's not God. My status is not my God. My role is a wonderful gift from God. And I'm blessed to, I always say, you're really, really lucky and blessed in this life if you can get paid for doing your hobby. And I don't want to make light of it, but that's kind of how it is. But I want us particularly in this moment, following the utter tragic murder of Charlie Kirk and what looks like the response to that evil in the States and how people have potentially sought to politicize the Christianity, to use it as a badge, as a kind of symbol of national identity and so on. I just want to encourage. I'm going to say something which is I'm sort of talking out of school here, but I don't think he'd mind because it's a conversation we had in front of other people. Just to shock you, last Monday night, I was walking through the same lobby as Nigel Farage. We were both in, it was a government motion. We both opposed it, and we had a chat. And he said to me, you must be really pleased, all these people going to church following Charlie Kirk's murder. My quick response to that was, I thought that's interesting. My quick response was, it all depends on what they hear when they turn up. Do they hear the gospel when they go there? And if people are going to go to church expecting to hear their politics endorsed, I hope they're going to be disappointed. I hope they're going to be challenged. I hope they're going to hear the gospel, because your politics will not save you. Politics is not ultimate. It is important. We're called to serve, to seek the good of the community in which you have been put. And that's absolutely our calling. But politics is important, but it's not ultimate. And Jesus will not endorse your politics. The better answer to a lot of the difficult questions I got when I was leader are, well, look, if there's a real God, and if he's almighty, and we're not, then you'd expect that God to contradict you and to disturb you. And so it is the case. Whatever opinions you come into church with, if you encounter the real living God, you will be disturbed and you'll be contradicted, but wonderfully so. Because every political leader and every other religious leader says, this is the way, follow this way. Jesus is different. He says, I am the way, the truth and the life. And it's not by thinking the right thoughts, by tweeting the right things, by working hard in your community or whatever it might be, and being righteous or whatever, that will gain you acceptance. It's simple faith in the risen Jesus Christ. And that is utterly, utterly wonderful. And so just a word really, tomorrow night, I am going to be going along to and briefly speaking in a debate on at the Lib conference in a fringe, an evening fringe, called Does Religion Help or Hinder the Liberal Democrats? Which is interesting. I mean, what a premise. So you can attach that from all sorts of different angles. One of which, of course, is to say that Christianity isn't a religion, it's a relationship. And Jesus Christ spends much of the New Testament, much of the Gospels, railing against the religious elites of his day. But the other thing is to try to understand a little bit more about what faith is. And if there's people here tonight who are not sure what to make of this Jesus, not quite sure what faith is about, I just want to say something which I hope you'll find helpful. And that is that faith is not really a thing. It's not a trait. It's a choice. And you might say, oh, I wish I had your faith. Well, it's not like ginger hair. It's not, which I did have. It's a choice. And it's not that some people are more inclined to faith than others, and I wish I had your faith, or what they really mean, I wish I had your credulity. But it's something very different. And my pastor often talks about the 555 bus. Now, the 555 bus celebrates its 100th anniversary this year, and it's the bus from Lancaster to Keswick, and it goes through the Lake District. It goes through Milnthorpe, where I live, Kendal, Windermere, Ambleside, Grasmere, Keswick. It's a glorious journey from Lancaster to Keswick. If I get onto the A6 near my house and I stand at a bus stop, within the hour, probably, the 555 will turn up, and it will say Keswick via Kendal. And if I trust that driver and what I know about the 555, and I get on that bus, I am trusting that that bus will take me to Kendal, or indeed further up into the lake should I wish to. Now I could stand at the bus stop and I can acknowledge that that bus is going to go to Kendal, Grasmere, Keswick, and so on. But if I don't get on, I'm not going there. So I can intellectually assent to the 555 heading all the way to Keswick, but I'm not going there if I don't get on. And even if I tentatively decide to get on, even if I'm racked with doubt, but I just about get myself on the bus, I'm going to Kendal and then Keswick. And maybe the better analogy, which I've always loved, is the analogy of ice. So you can have absolutely tons of confidence. You can be 100% dead sure that that 1 millimeter thick ice over the river will carry your weight. It doesn't matter how utterly certain you are of that. Your feet are getting wet. You're going through. It's only a millimeter of ice. It's not going to carry you. But the river might also have 5 meters thick ice right down to the bottom. And you might be terrified. you might see there's no chance of you getting from your side to the other. But if you tentatively start inching your way across that ice, you are safe and secure because it's 5 meters thick. You see, it is not the strength of your faith that saves you. It's the strength of the one in whom you have your faith that saves you. So get on the bus. Get on the bus. So look, I just finished by saying this really, which is that I think it's important to remember, all of us, that the world exists around us whether we like it or not. Politics will happen whether we're involved in it or not. And as my friend Andy Flanagan sometimes says, politics is decided by those who show up. And it's important that we do. And for me as a Christian, my great prayer is that more people who are Christians would choose to show up. The reality is that Christians who are politicians are also imperfect. Turns out we're sinners too, and we'll make mistakes. And things will not be perfect. If every member of the House of Commons was a Christian, this country would still be probably in a mess one way or another. But I'd like to think it wouldn't be in quite such a mess, that the quality of our discourse might be more gracious, that the thinking of things which might only change in 20, 30 years' time but don't win an election immediately, that might be more likely to happen. But I do want to encourage you to think about politics as something that you would want to be involved with yourself. It is my great honour to continue to serve a community. I am, as I say, delighted I was leader and delighted that I'm not leader. But for me, in the position of being post-ambitious, shall we say, it's a privilege to get alongside people whose future might be ahead of them and to encourage them to make wiser choices than I did. In the end, is politics a mucky business? Yes, it is. And so's teaching. So's being in the health service, so is being a street cleaner, so is being a bus driver, whatever it is. Everything is a mucky business since the fall, and we are not called to hide away. We're called to engage where we have been put. Whatever we do unto the Lord. It's a great privilege. You might think that what you do every day is mundane. God's put you there. You've been appointed by the only ruler of princes to do whatever it is you do. That's an epic calling. And I pray that you will take God with you as you go there. Happy to take questions. Thanks for having me.
Tim, it's just so refreshing to hear somebody fire from the hip about these important things. Genuine. Real, transparent, engaging. You make a good preacher. So when you retire from politics, then why not? Actually, that's one of the first questions. Keep them coming in. I have many more questions, Tim, that we can possibly get through in one setting. But let's begin with the first question, which is eventually your time as an MP will end either by personal choice or the electorate. So what lies beyond? Will it be a short trip to the Lords? Or do you have interests and ambitions outside of Westminster that you're likely to pursue?
A couple of thoughts. So when I was first elected, which is 20 years ago, I was with a friend who'd also been recently elected, who was the guy, I ought to say, who lost his seat a few years ago and said, I'd lost my identity. But we were in our first couple of weeks as MPs. We were trying to get out of Parliament. It had been a late night. The lights were down, and we got lost, frankly. And we ended up wandering into the House of Lords lobby. And one of us said to the other, "I think we're in the wrong place." And the police officer who was stood on sentry duty just said, "Not in the wrong place, sirs. Just 30 years too early." Which is a great line. I've no idea. I'm not sure if I'd particularly want to be in the Lords. My wife, I listened to a colleague maybe a couple of years ago saying to me that they said, a bit younger than me, and they said, I think I've got another career in me after this. I thought, that's interesting. And I reported this back to my wife, Rosie, at the weekend. She said, "Are you thinking that too?" And I said, "I don't think so." And she said, "Well, yeah, good." She said, "Because you may well have another career in you after this, but you won't love it half as much as this, so why would you bother?" And so I don't have any particular plans to step down, but the electorate might have plans to get rid of me. That's always entirely possible. And I guess, where would I be called? So I enjoy writing. I think I would seek to do more of this more often, probably, if the Lord, keeps me going beyond my time in Parliament. And we'd see. I have no particular ambitions.
No.
I mean, I think one of the great things I say, I jokingly
How about
call
Blackburn Rovers
winning
something?
I mean, I've lived through as winning stuff. I kind of think when I first went to Ewood Park when I was little, if someone had offered me a deal then, right, they're going to be a bit average for a few years, then for 20 years they're going to be epic, they're going to win the Premier League and the League Cup, and then they will make your life miserable for the rest of your life. Yeah. I'd have taken that, but I'm now having to cope with the latter half of that promise.
So here's another question, Tim. Are there political parties which align better, in your view, with Christian values than others?
So tomorrow, if I get the chance to say much at this debate tomorrow night, I'll say a couple of things to try to convince my colleagues that they shouldn't be sniffy about Christianity. And there's two things. One is historical, and the other is, I guess, philosophical, really. So first of all, the Liberal Party came into existence because of evangelicals in the 19th century, in part because, and I'm not being rude about the Church of England, but in part because the established church had the rights to all levers of power in the country and access to all the top jobs and everything. But also, there was a great deal of nominal Christianity about that, and the non-conformists, evangelicals, generally speaking, Bible-believing Christians, felt that was not fair and had a party that advocated for their having the same rights. But also, they then became the voices of all the other groups that were minorities, Jewish people, a small number of Muslim people, atheists, and other groups that weren't powerful, like women, for example. So I kind of think, so that's my kind of historical citing as why the Liberals should care about Christianity and be grateful to it, for it, so to speak. But the other thing is, I mean, I absolutely sign up to the Tom Holland and also Glenn Scrivener line. You'll know Glenn from along the way, whose book, The Air We Breathe, is every bit as good. I mean, somebody, I think he rather self-deprecatingly said it was Dominion for Dummies. But it's not. It's because Tom Holland comes from a much more philosophical point of view, whereas Glenn comes from a very, very strong faith in Christ point of view. And the reason why that book is called The Air That We Breathe is that people who are not Christians don't realise that their philosophy, their worldview, their values are entirely gospel-shaped, and that small l, small d, Western liberal democracy absolutely owes its tenets to the gospel. What do I mean by that? I mean, the belief that every human being is made in God's image is fundamental to how we in the West think society should operate. And also the fact that we believe in the fallen nature of humanity. You know, we think that every human being is awesome and awful. And why is that important? So we believe every human being is made in the image of God. This really matters. So, you know, I don't know if you're a space nerd. I am a space nerd. And if you look at those epic galaxies that the James Webb Telescope is showing us, they're mind-blowing. You're more important than all of those put together. You're more valuable than all of those put together. You really matter. So if your rights are impinged or if your welfare is affected, that's an offence to the God of the universe. So we're awesome. And then because we're sinners, my goodness me, we shouldn't concentrate too much power in the hands of too few of us. So I think that underpins a democratic and even a liberal democratic view of the world. That doesn't mean other political views aren't, all right as well. But I just think for those people who, and to quote somebody else, you'll come across Os Guinness, who talks about us being a cut flower society. Because so those very values I've just talked about, which are the wellspring of the imperfect but better. I'm all over the place, aren't I? Winston Churchill once said, democracy is a terrible system, it's just better than all the alternatives. And it is better than all the alternatives. And because It is about protecting us from, concentration of power in too few hands. But Os Guinness's point is that those values that underpin democracy come from the gospel, and maybe, just maybe, like cut flowers, they can still flourish for a while when they're not in the roots of the ground. But after a while, they will die off. And the danger is that as we say we care about these values of equality and of justice and equal dignity, but if we're cut off from the roots of those beliefs, Christianity, they'll die away. And to say something controversial, a guy called Aaron Wrenn wrote just the week after Donald Trump was elected last November, he said, only in a post-Christian America could Donald Trump be elected president. The point he's making is that there's a whole bunch of people who a generation ago would never vote for a philanderer, would never vote for a man who owned casinos. But there's a generation, yes, the evangelicals felt that we're going to vote for the Republican candidate because he's better than that lot. But the other people who voted for him in small part, no small part, because those things don't matter to them anymore. That integrity doesn't matter to them anymore. We're a cut flower society, and if we're not careful, the flowers die.
Here's a question, Tim, based upon, I guess, your personal experience in terms of leading a political party, and as you've just described it, the prevailing cultural trends in terms of secularism. Is it therefore ever conceivable that a Christian could lead a political party?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I do mean it that someone wiser than me would have navigated my travails far better. I do think that Kate Forbes did. So yes. But Christianity is always countercultural. It's meant to be. So if you're breezily going to the top of the tree and as a Christian, you're probably doing something wrong. Is there a glass ceiling for Christians in politics? There might be, and there perhaps ought to be, because we're meant not to fit in. But I got to be leader of my party. Kate Forbes got to be the finance secretary in the Scottish Parliament, came within a fraction of a few votes of becoming the First Minister of Scotland. So if there is a glass ceiling, it's relatively high. But it should always be challenging. Christianity, in every era, Christianity is countercultural. Now, in the current era, it may be countercultural because of some, in particular, where it touches the rub of society on personal morality issues. But in another time, it might have been jingoism, it might have been militarism, it might have been nominal Christianity. There is if you're fitting in as a Christian in the society, you perhaps need to have a little look at yourself.
Okay. Here's a question on the back of that about sexual ethics, morality. The questioner admires your integrity in stepping down from leadership to maintain your Christian principles. But here's the question. Have your own views on same-sex marriage changed over time?
No. I mean, I voted to permit it at second reading because I kind of, just going back to what I said earlier on, it's not for me to legislate to make people who don't believe in Jesus act as though they did. Nevertheless, I'm absolutely clear what the Bible says about sex and sexuality. I think that's unmistakable. And I take an orthodox biblical position on those things, and it's bound to be a source of struggling for people. But no, I don't qualify it. I mean, if we think we know better than God what counts as sin, we're not in a good place.
So here's some questions around racism and patriotism. Any racism disguised as patriotism, nationalism is clearly wrong. But why does, especially the left, blur the distinction between legal and illegal immigration? It seems that in our culture, those who stand up against illegal immigration are tarred with the same brush as racists and the far right.
So I think it's perfectly okay to have a disagreement about what levels of migration there should be. I think the issue, so there is illegal migration, and let's be completely straight about the nomenclature here. Illegal immigration in this country is people who have overstayed their visas and are, generally speaking, working in the undercover economy. Very often exploited, by the way. They're much more likely to be victims than they are criminals, though they are also committing a crime by being here illegally. People who arrive by boat, who shouldn't, by the way, I'll come to that in a minute, are not arriving illegally. It is legal to claim asylum anywhere. Doesn't mean that you need to accept that claim, but you know, and what I particularly dislike is the phrase, the word illegals. When I just said earlier on that we're all made in the image of God, how dare you disparage a person and call them an illegal? An illegal. No. They are seeking asylum. Now, if I sought a job and didn't get it, I wouldn't be a bogus job seeker. I'd be an unsuccessful one. And so let's just go back and look at in the end, this is a really tough issue. And if anybody offers you a simplistic solution for you to it, they're having you on. In the end, the majority of displaced people stay within the country in which they're displaced. Of those who become refugees, 86% of them stay in the next door country. And then there is a slow trickle, diminishing trickle, going to other places. And yes, of course, people, particularly from countries with a Commonwealth Empire heritage, might head through Europe and head towards the UK. It's just worth pointing out, isn't it, that Germany takes 4 times more than we do. France takes 3 times more than we do. That 18 of the European Union countries take more than we do per capita. And I'm not saying it's not important, but it's been elevated in importance beyond the reality of it. In the end, how do you deal with the issue? With people who seek asylum, we just need to decide, we need to be able to judge, are they genuine refugees or are they not? And if they are, let them pay taxes and let them become part of our society. And if they're not, then you respectfully and humanely remove them. And we've been failing as a country to do either of those things. Now, the boats. The reality is that there were very few boat crossings until 2020. There were some starting in 1718, a few hundred a year maximum. I think 300 was a maximum before 2020. And that mostly happened because basically the Channel Tunnel people got better at stopping people getting onto lorries. And that is a long coast, a very long coast. But the UK being outside of the Dublin Treaty, in other words, outside the European Union, is generally why we have the problem now, because there is no right to return. And you don't solve international crises by sticking your fingers in your ears and pretending it's somebody else's problem. And in the end, as Christians, we just have to go back to do to others as we would have done to ourselves. If, let's say, Eritrea, and I'll pick Eritrea for a good reason, really. Eritrea is a country where a Islamist dictator has a habit of conscripting young men from Christian communities to persecute and murder those Christian communities. So you would leg it, wouldn't you? And it's men and not women, because they're the ones who are conscripted. And by the way, women don't go and take those journeys, because I went to Cairo earlier this year. I met a woman who was 17, who was the chair of what was called the Young Mothers Group, which is a terrible euphemism. These were a load of women from 12 to 18 who'd all been raped, because that's what happens to women of any age on the move. And that's why if you say, oh, it's all young men, there's a reason why it's all young men, because women don't move for that reason. And I say that as just a little bit of a vignette to remind us this is more complex than the latest thing that came up on your social media feed has told you. And we should think of these people with compassion. They will not all be saints and angels. Many of them will be guilty of terrible things. So are we. But go back to the golden rule. Let's imagine Eritrea was a relatively peaceful, safe place with religious freedom and a level of peace without persecution. Let's imagine the United Kingdom was a war-torn basket case run by a dictator and we fled for our lives. How would we want the people of Eritrea to posture towards us? Answer that question honestly, and you have your answer to how we should relate to refugees.
Related, could you elaborate the difference between, as described, patriotism and nationalism in the light of what's going on in the UK at the moment with the flags and the St. George Cross and the immigrant issue, the conflation of some of those things.
Yeah.
So the question is about the difference, the distinction between patriotism and nationalism.
Yeah. It's important not to be too black and white. I just come from giving a rally speech about all that kind of stuff, where I walked off the stage literally wearing a Blackburn Rovers St. George's flag, saying the pride of Lancashire, and there was 2 Burnley fans in the corner who booed me. It's not quite as black and white, but the black and white thing I say is that patriots love their country and nationalists hate their neighbour. There's a bit, that's, I think, too black and white. And my friend Kate Forbes would wag her finger at me. I think that, I suppose, to love your country is good. To worship your country is bad. And I think that nationalism, which is where I think Christianity and Christians need to be careful that we don't find Christianity appropriated as part of a series of identities that are part of the wider British identity. So, the liberal left are often, I mean, some will be anti-patriotic, or they're more likely to be sniffy. I would say, by the way, that over my life, I remember, as a football fanatic, being barred from going to football matches because of hooliganism in the 70s and 80s, and then finally persuaded my mother it was all right. And where in those days, the St. George's flag was, I'm afraid, synonymous with the NF and so on. And with those of you with memories long enough will know there was a moment when it changed, and it was when Gaza cried in 1990, when suddenly the England flag and what it was to be English suddenly became just a bit more benign. And it carried on being like that until relatively recently. And I hate the thought of flags and our flag being weaponised. And I will say this really. So, this is going to sound a little bit chippy. I hope there's nobody American in here who's going to be offended by this. But the thing about, so England was formed, it's true this, honestly, other people may have another story. England was formed in my constituency in 927 AD in Westmoreland, in a place called Eamont, just south of Penrith, where Athelstan was crowned as the first king of a united England. And that's a long time. So the sense in which our identity as English people and British people is kind of settled over centuries. And so haven't we just thought it's a bit kind of vulgar to fly flags? Because we're English and we're above all that kind of nonsense. And flying your flag is the thing that these new countries do, like America, who aren't so sure of their identity. Because we're confident in our identity, we don't need to worry about the flag quite so much, and we look down on people a little bit. So I almost think the truly English-British thing to do is to not fly your flag, because you're, we're above all that kind of thing. But having said all that, it's a symbol of who we are as a country, and it should be a thing that unites. And the reality is, putting your flag outside your window is a fine thing. You hanging a flag, a St. George's flag, deliberately next door to a hostel where asylum seekers are terrified of being firebombed and living on £9 a week, we know what that's about, and we shouldn't tolerate it.
You mentioned in your talk about the impact that we can all have in whatever spheres of life God calls us. So just picking up on that and pushing it out a bit more, how can Christians in their different spheres of influence make a significant contribution beyond the public declaration of their faith? Are there other ways that we could make our impact felt across the world?
Yeah, I mean, so whatever you do, do unto the Lord, and whatever your hands find to do, do with all your might. And so in terms of engaging with politics, and what is politics? I mean, there's a fine line, if there is a line, between community action, which I hope you're involved with, through Christians Against Poverty, through meeting the needs of people who are homeless, through meeting the needs of people who struggle with mental health conditions, people who are lonely in our communities. That is a really important thing to do. We don't do that instead of the gospel. We do it because Jesus died for us. We do it to share his love with other people and to win the opportunity to share the gospel with them when that opportunity does arise. But also to engage with politicians. I mean, you're really privileged to have Toby here. And I think it's a great thing. And I think that I would encourage Christians to build relationships with your politicians, councillors, candidates, MPs, and especially if they're not Christians. So there'll be things that you care about. And so I'd love you to kind of, go and see your councillor, go and see your members of Parliament. And don't behave like another lobby group. Be gracious to them. Find out what they care about. Carefully, but nevertheless do so. Tell them you're going to pray for those things. And find things where you can make common cause. And there'll be things where you might disagree with your MP over. You might disagree with their position on assisted dying or something. But you can find, and by all means, absolutely challenge them on that, graciously, kindly. But at the same time, find something where you have common cause. It might be, sorting out the potholes. It might be about restoring a local park, something which is of value to the community. Be people who turn up and be a witness to your politicians. And, it might turn out that you become one yourself.
A couple of questions I think we've got to finish, Tim. Here's an easy one for you. Is the UK government right to recognise a Palestinian state?
So I have always felt that the answer, if there is one, to the Israel-Palestine conflict is the recognition of two states, which live peacefully alongside each other. I've also always thought that the chances of that working, if Israel doesn't consent to it, is close to zero. So I have been reluctant to say that we should unilaterally recognise Palestine. But I also think the Israeli state, the Israeli government doesn't have the right to permanently veto it. And so I'm afraid I've got to the stage now where I think that's probably what we should do. I am nervous about it. My sense is that what we know about Palestine and the nature of that community is that the chances of it being a one-party dictatorship, clerical state, is extremely high, and it becoming a failed state very quickly is very, very high. And what does that mean? So I think that the realities trouble me greatly. And for all that I am bitterly opposed to Netanyahu as leader of Israel, it's so important to remember it's the only democracy in that region. Put bluntly, it's probably the only place in that region where you could be a Christian or indeed be gay and be able to live peacefully. And indeed, it's a society where 20% of the members of its parliament are Palestinian. There is nothing like it in any of the countries that surround it. It is massively flawed. And it's run currently by an administration, I think, which are guilty of appalling acts. But its neighbour could be even worse. But the short answer is, yes, I do. But I very reluctantly come to that point of view. I would have much preferred it was a result of a peaceful negotiation where Israel kept to what it always said it did believe, which was the establishment of a two-state solution, and that state came into being with the consent and the active participation and facilitation of the Israeli state, and it's a tragedy that this is where we are.
Here's a question about how you vote in a fallen world, in a world where some of the choices are less or more helpful than others. So the question's framed in this way. How should we vote if the following are in conflict? For those with whom we disagree on an issue important to us but have more integrity and trust, or those who might vote for something we want but don't have honour?
It's very interesting that. I mean, I had a... what it immediately... I mean, first of all, when we make a decision to vote and to choose a party or a candidate, it's very rarely black and white. You've got to balance these things, and your judgment is as valid as anybody else's. I was really interested to spend a period of time before and especially after the American presidential election last year interviewing people who've been involved in American politics who are Christians, and in particular to interview genuine committed Christians, not cultural Christians, real believers who'd supported Donald Trump, and to say, well, what was that all about? And actually, there's one guy in particular, a guy called Johnny from Texas, a pastor, who was really quite open about recognising that Trump's integrity was not all that, shall we say. But he took the view that but he doesn't take us for granted, and it's a transactional thing. That Trump gives us some of the policies that we want, even though we think we recognise his lack of integrity. And so that is a very interesting perspective. It's not one I would take, but there's clearly a view there from some of those people that they're not necessarily blind to his behaviours, his actions, his track record, his personal integrity, but they think it's kind of worth it because of what it means policy-wise. But there you are, that's an observation.
Voting for the policy rather than the person.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. I mean, it's just a quick observation about America again. I mean, John McCain was really scathing about what is often referred to as the American religious right. It didn't stop 76% of self-identified white evangelicals in America still voting for him. So really, since Reagan, since the late 70s, that kind of white evangelical bloc has voted 70 to 80% for a Republican. And Trump got 80%-ish. So it's not that unusual. And so the point that, Aaron Wren makes about only in a post-Christian America could Trump win maybe tells you where the other votes came from. And it's people who were, excited about somebody who was sticking it to the guys on the other side of the chamber they didn't like, these terrible left-wing people. Not that the Democrats are very left-wing by, British standards, but they are by theirs. And a bit like, if you support a football team, you'll all had a player at some point who every other team's fans hate. and they're a dirty so-and-so, and they play in midfield, and they get away with red cards, but you love them because they're on your side. And you can think, I don't know, Roy Keane, David Batty, Robbie Savage, the kind of players, Nobby Stiles back in the day. And Donald Trump's like that to a lot of people. We know he's a bad one, but he really upsets that lot. and so there's an element of that, I'm afraid.
I like the way you bring often football into your analogies.
Yes, that's because that's all I think about.
Okay, we'll allow this last slightly humorous question, and actually the questioner is happy for his identity to be included.
Oh dear.
Is there a wrong party to join as a Christian? Andy, Green Party member.
Oh, bless you, Andy. Well, no. So, I mean, I don't. I mean, I think that I think if you're associated with Tommy Robinson, you should have a really good, long, hard look at yourself. But I think Greens, Labour, I mean, Corbynites, I mean, one of the most faithful Christians, I'm going to mention her. Rachel Maskell is the Labour MP for York, who is a left-wing Labour MP, was part of Corbyn's team when he was in opposition, and is a very faithful, committed Christian and a wonderful woman. So, you can be, yes, there's elements of communism, Marxism, which entails atheism, but you don't need to buy that part of the message. If you can be very, very left-wing, not buying the atheist bit of it, absolutely consistent with being a Christian, so to be a Liberal, so to be a Green, so to be a Tory. I mean, and I'm always, I get cross with the Reform Party and some people in it, but I also think I know godly people who are in the Reform Party, and apparently, if you listen to my podcast this week, you'll realise I've had an impact on the Reform Party inadvertently, because I asked my friend Tim Montgomery a few weeks ago. I said, look, there's a Lib Dem Christian Forum, there's a Christian Conservative Fellowship, there's the Labour Party's Christians on the left. Is there a Reform Party Christian group? And he said, no, there isn't, but there should be. And they've apparently set one up, all because of my conversation with him, and I should therefore be rightly considered as a founder member of the Reform Christian Network, as they shall call themselves. But there you go. So no, but I think, I'm going to say that the politics of Tommy Robinson entails a worldview that I genuinely, respectfully believe is anathema, or should be anathema, to Bible-believing Christians, even and maybe especially because of the appropriation of the symbols of Christianity.
So there we are, Andy, Green Party member. You're okay.
You're all right, yeah.
You're okay. You're okay. Tim,
flawed like I am, it's fine.
You've been very generous in your time tonight, and very candid in your responses, and it's been an absolute joy to hear you, watch you interact, as a Christian as opposed to a politician. And that itself is very, very refreshing. Maybe you're amongst friends, I suppose. So, so you've been able to be free and frank and clear. And genuinely, we want to pray for you and people like Toby and others who are engaged in the interface, in the political discourse of our culture. Churches like this need increasingly to be part of the Christian voice in our society, identifying with people like you, or the Greens who love Jesus, or anyone else for that matter, because we want to be a church that has its contribution to the salt and light influence in our society. Not everyone here in the room tonight, of course, is from Lansdowne Church, but I'm sure that, and I would hope that that would be your concern too, that as you name Christ, like Tim has tonight in a variety of ways, so you will have that influence for good, as a good neighbor, as a good citizen, as a good member of the local church. God calls us to be salt and light in those contexts, and I'll shut up before I start preaching myself. So. But Tim, again, we put our hands together to thank you very much for being with us.
It's a real joy. Thank you. Thank you.
Good, and we promised 9 o'clock on the dot, and there we are, just 9 o'clock.
A man of your word.
God bless you, friends. Go home. But not too quick. Get Tim's book. It's in the hub, in the entrance area. Mucky Business. On your way out, we've got copies there, and I think they'll do a deal with you for that. And also, I think I saw Bible College in a box on the table too. I don't know what that's doing there, but Mucky Business. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
We need to do it.